Hello, my friends, and welcome to this Firepit Fable, where I am joined at the firepit by a truly special guest. But before we begin, let us all sit back, relax, close your eyes if it's safe to do so, and imagine you were sat at that fire at the heart of the forest, at the time between times, the time it's neither night nor day, but the sun has gone, and the sky is grey. The time when the veil between our world and the fairy world grows wafer, wafer thin. So thin that for a few moments we can reach into their realm, or for a few moments they can reach into ours. So join me with my guest, Wayne Gilbert, the host of one of my favourite podcasts, YouTube channels, and storytelling extraordinaire, I suppose, Eerie Edinburgh. Wayne, welcome, my friend.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for inviting me to the fire. It's a lovely heat that it's kicking off. Good fire. Well done.
It's so good to have you here because you may not know this, and I don't want it to come across as being creepy, but you have been my companion on many a journey, many a walk in the forest, many a trip where I make my way down through the village. I will listen to Eerie Edinburgh. For me, it's a fantastic, fantastic channel. It does storytelling in such an understated way. For someone who's been always accused of being a bit bombastic, a bit of a Brian Blessed of storytelling sometimes, to have your voice in such a measured, calm way has really taken me in some lovely journeys in the past. And often I've had to sit up and just sort of break myself out of the story, and that is the best compliment I can give you, because I lose myself entirely in your tale. I've spent many happy times in Edinburgh over the years, having been there for the Fringe with my storytelling shows. And I know all the ghost stories that people tell there, the ones from Greyfriars, the Royal Mile, the Castle, and all those famous tales. But it wasn't until I came across Eerie Edinburgh that I realised some of those lesser known tales. Some of those great stories that are hidden, buried in that old rock that you call home. It's an amazing, amazing channel. I don't want to go into all the success that you've had. You recently talked with our good friend Nat Doig of the Weird in the Wade podcast, and people can listen to you speaking there, where you tell all about how much you gained viewers overnight. But what took you there, Wayne? What took you from knowing these tales to actually getting them down on video, to actually putting them out there, to having that confidence?
Well, firstly, thank you for that introduction. I'm genuinely beaming, as I would say up here at that. I don't think I ever expected to be described in such a lovely way as you have. That's very, very, very kind of you. So to answer your question, what took me there? It's people like yourself. I mentioned when I chatted to Nat about another Edinburgh storyteller, a guy called John Tintallan from a channel called North Edinburgh Nightmares. He's a fantastic storyteller. He's of a similar vein to you. You know, he tells the story, whereas I feel I just kind of narrate the story. You guys put yourselves into the story, and he focused on the stories from the local area that I live in, Leith, and just kind of as you said there, you mentioned that you felt you knew the stories, but then you listen to the Eerie Edinburgh stuff and you realise there's so many more stories. So that's kind of why I started with the website. I wanted to make sure that the stories that were sort of losing didn't get lost under the Greyfriars, under the stories of the vaults and Mr. Boots and things. So I started the website with that in mind. And then I just, through my work, I kind of deal with the comms side of things for the office that I work in. I have some of the tools that I use currently for the YouTube stuff. And I kind of realized this is I don't want to downplay it, but it's not as difficult as I first imagined it to be. So it was a year ago at Christmas time. I thought I've just written a wee story about a murder in Bible land. Why don't I just try it on YouTube and see how it goes? I've had a few people in the past tell me that I've got quite a soothing voice, so I thought if I can narrate the story well enough, people might not take the mickey out of my voice, and the Scottish accent seems to go down quite well with a lot of people. So I thought I'll just give it a try, and if it works, great. If it doesn't work, then no harm, no foul. And it started. Well, it took maybe 2 or 3 episodes for it to really kick off, but I've just passed 10,000 subscribers on the channel, which blows my mind. I can't get over that, and I'm close to a million views so far as well. So yeah, it was just really keep the stories alive and just give it a try and see how it goes.
It's fantastic, Wayne. And I think Edinburgh could be proud of you as well, because you were telling those stories that other people aren't. And those stories are getting heard by New Year's after they've been, laying dormant for so long. And I think that's something you could be really proud of. The Murder in Bible Land, The Seaton Haunting, and The Graceful Ghost of George Street is one of my favourites. I just love that tale from the new town, where just behind Prince's Street, which is so familiar for me, to have that ghost sort of gliding down there in the middle of the day and going into the pharmacy, that really touched a nerve with me and really sort of got me really inspired. Is there a story? Is there a place? Is there a tale that really resonates with you for being part of Edinburgh or part of the stories that not many people have heard? Is there one that really jumps out at you?
Oh, there's maybe a couple. The one you just mentioned, the Seaton haunting, has. I love ancient Egypt. I love Egyptian history, and that blends ghosts with Egyptian history and Edinburgh. It's set in it starts off in the 1930s. Of Sir Alexander Seaton and his wife, Selah, if memory serves as her name, take a trip to the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, and as rich tourists do, she thinks she can take stuff that doesn't belong to her, and she takes a sacrum from a mummy in the one of the tombs that they were given special access to. She manages to get it back through customs and into her home in Edinburgh, and basically all hell breaks loose. Starts off quite innocuously. A chimney falls down as dinner party guests are leaving, and then it escalates to rooms being trashed. The bone is placed in the centre of the room in like a decorative case, and the bone is never damaged. Sir Alexander's, I think it's his nephew, comes to stay for a while, and he sees a strange figure in white moving around the property. When you think about Egyptian ghosts and a strange figure in white, you automatically go to, the classic image of a mummy? I don't think it was, but as a kid when I grew up, that's how it played out in my head. And ultimately, the family had to call in one of the relatives who was a minister from Fort Augustus up north to kind of bless the house and carry out a sort of mini exorcism, and then they burned the bone. And afterwards, the story goes that the event stopped after that. But if you speak to the people in the property or who have lived in the property, there are still strange things that happen in there. One of the good things about the place is it's regularly, because it's an old Georgian townhouse, it's split now into different flats, and there's regularly the flats are up for rent quite often, so you can get in to have a view and then you can ask a few questions. And people do talk about how there are strange things still happening in there. So that was probably the first Edinburgh story that really captured my imagination. I used to love going to the Edinburgh Museum, to the Egyptian exhibits. I think they've rightfully given them back to Egypt now. So it kind of blended that in with me as well, plus the kind of classic imagery of ghosts. And when I started to read more about ghosts, one of my favourite books, and I can't remember which one it is now, but that carried the story of that, and it had a kind of forward from Peter Underwood, who said that this was the great ghost hunter and writer. He said that it's probably the most convinced by a ghost story that he's ever been. So that kind of added that extra layer of authenticity to it. So I always loved that story. A story that's just on a different level, and it's quite a gruesome level, is the Queensbury House cannibal. I love that story. It's just gruesome. It's just a terrible story. Queensbury House is a 17th century house on the Royal Mile. It's now used, ironically, as part of the Scottish Parliament. The secretaries and the admin staff work in Queensbury House. And the irony is it's now part of a devolved Parliament, but the guy who owned the house, the Marquis of Queensbury, was one of the key players in Scotland signing the Act of Union, which wasn't in 1707, which wasn't popular among the populace. When the Act of Union was signed, there were riots and there were parties, and the Marquis took his family, whether they were fleeing from the riots or going to a party. Is one of these things that's up for its conjecture. But what had happened was he had a son who was described in the terms of the time as a bit of an idiot, a bit of a violent idiot, and he was kept under lock and key under one of the basement rooms. And unfortunately, the son managed to escape. He was only about 10 years old at the time. And he discovered that the house was being looked after by a 12-year-old kitchen boy. And when the family returned to the house, they walked into the smell of food being cooked. So they kind of got themselves ready, headed down to the kitchen to discover that the kitchen boy had been murdered by the son and was being roasted over the spit and being prepared to be cooked, which is just a terrible, terrible, awful story. And it's a true story, which I always kind of thought it's just a tale, just made up. But it's true. The fireplace that the boy was roasted over is part of the bar that the MPs drink in now. And the ghosty aspect of it is over the years, Queensbury House, it's a grand house, big house. It's one of my favourite houses in Edinburgh, but it's been used for different things over the time. And from the start of, I think, the 20th century up until maybe the 1970s, it was used as a kind of care home for old folks. And a lot of the nurses would report they would see dark shadows moving in the house, the rooms. And also some of them reported being pinned up against walls by black shapes. So there is a ghost apparition kind of aspect to it. But just as in terms of a story, it's a terrible but a wonderful story. Perfect Edinburgh story.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. As I said, I've spent some time in Edinburgh. I can remember many a dark night when I'd be walking the streets after doing my show. I'd stayed for a couple of drinks, and all of a sudden the city gets very quiet late at night. I've got an experience where I walked from the grass market down towards the Royal Mile once, and I'm sure there was someone behind me. And I turned around and there was nobody there. I've been up to Arthur's Seat, I've been to Greyfriars, I've been into the New Town, I've been to all these places, and it's such an atmospheric place. As a native who has a real interest in ghost stories and someone who tells them so well and someone who does a lot of research on them, have you ever had a really eerie Edinburgh experience yourself?
Yes, I guess I have. I've had a couple. I think one in Edinburgh, one outside of Edinburgh. The one in Edinburgh sticks in my mind. It was my first job. I would have been, I'm going to give my age away here. I think it was about 15 and around about 1990 or 1991, just about to turn 16. My parents used to be self-employed, so they worked late quite often. And this was in the winter of that year. I came home roughly around about 6:30, 7 o'clock. I remember that because it was dark. My parents would be home maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock. So I thought I'm just going to sit down and watch the telly. We had one of those huge old 90s big thick tellies with the big glass front. So it was like a mirror when it was turned off and the light was on in the room. And I sat down, picked up the remote to switch the telly on because it was the 90s. We didn't care about climate change back then. We didn't turn the tellies off as you should do. And I could see in the reflection, the doorway that was to my left that entered the room, there was a man standing in the reflection of the television. He was probably, if I stretched out my arm, I could probably touch him. I kind of sat just staring at the television, looking at this reflection of this man wearing in my head, he looked like Humphrey Bogart. I was 15, 16-year-old. I didn't really have that much cultural references for these things. but he had a trench coat on and he had I think it was a fedora. I remember just looking at this character for what felt like hours, but probably only a couple of seconds. And then it turned, and I remember seeing the coat billow out as he turned and spun and walked out the room. And on that, I quickly left the house and sat outside waiting for my parents to come home. I knew they wouldn't believe me, so I just kind of, to my mum, I was like, I just needed a wee bit of fresh air. So I was just sitting outside. But when they came back in, I made a point of going around and checking all the doors, because we had patio doors and we had a lot of windows. It was quite a big house and everything was locked. I don't know if it was locked from the inside or what, but everything was locked. There was no signs of anybody coming or going. So I can't explain that, other than there was potentially somebody in the house, but nobody left the door that I had open, and I didn't hear anybody leaving the house. It's in an area called Comiston, and a street called Penton Grove, and it's off the time of the person that I saw. I never felt anything in any other room. I never felt anything or saw anything before or after that. Just that one occasion where I saw the silhouette of somebody standing, and it reflected in the television screen.
Incredible. Did that have an effect on you living in that house? Was it something that bothered you for after that?
No, to be honest, not really. The house that I lived in before was close to Morton Hall Cemetery, and that played on my mind because I was convinced that a vampire was going to rise up from the grave and cut across the fence and come and get me, to the point that I was genuinely drawing up blueprints for making myself a metal collar to put around my neck, because obviously vampires only bite you in the throat. So I'd kind of gotten over myself a wee bit by that time, and I just sort of thought that was just kind of weird. I never really, like I said, I never really felt uncomfortable in that house or a presence or anything like that. It was just that one event that happened. So I probably just thought maybe I was tired. I'd been at school through the day and I'd gone to my job straight after school. But it's still a very vivid image in my head of the reflection in the television screen.
Great stuff. It's an ancient city. It's full of history. It's full of castles. It's full of woe. It's full of tales of battles, of beheadings, of grave robbers, all these wonderful things. But what is it, do you think, that makes Edinburgh that cut above other places? What do you think makes it so eerie?
It's a good question. So there seems to be a couple of layers to Edinburgh. You have the Old Town. For people who don't know, the Old Town is original Edinburgh. We have the Castle Rock. It's got Edinburgh Castle sat at the top of it, and down the spine of the hill that sits on is the area known as the Royal Mile. It's not a large area. There used to be something like 60,000 people living in this. I think it's maybe just a mile squared, something like that. So everybody literally lived on top of each other. As they reckon the first tenements or the first skyscrapers were built in Edinburgh because it was overcrowded. You didn't have an option to build out the way because there was marshland basically surrounding it, and you've got the sea close by and things like that. So people were crammed on top of each other. And because of that, there was so much darkness happened in such a concentrated area. I'm writing my next story should be about the Nidri Vaults, and the lead into that is talking about the murders of Burke and Hare that happened just down from the castle. You've got a chap called Major Weir who lived just off the Royal Mile. There's so many macabre acts that happened in this area that it feels like it's left that indelible mark in the earth itself. So the Old Town feels quite easy to explain because of everything that's happened and the amount of people that have lived there in the past. But then you have the New Town hauntings, which are really on a different level. On one of the videos, I kind of map out some of the most famous hauntings from that area. You have like the Learmonth Gardens, which is where the Seaton haunting happened. You've got the Learmonth Hotel, which is just up the road. There's Anne Street, which is haunted by a couple of ghosts. There's Buckingham Terrace, which is a terrible ghost of a sea captain who beheaded a baby and shoved its body into a grandfather clock. And there's a couple others around there. It's all, it's all within a half square mile. So these are more spread out. It's a newer area. When I say it's newer, it's still like 300 years old. So what is it that causes these really extreme and not your typical ghost walking through a wall type haunting? And I don't have an answer to that, to be honest with you. The water of Leith runs past that area, so a lot of people say the water's a conduit for energy, that kind of thing. The rocks might hold on to something, but again, some of the tales that I've told you, like the Buckingham Terrace, the sea captain, quite a violent event that happened there. So has that left that imprint in that household? And the same with the Learmonth Garden. Is that a kind of ancient curse that transferred from Egypt to Learmonth with the Statons when they took the bumbone, as Uncanny List calls it, home with her? It's a good question. Don't quite have an answer for you.
Well, all I can say, Wayne, is Eerie Edinburgh is a fantastic channel. It is something that's worth a watch from everybody. It's so understated and yet so powerful in the way that it tells its tales. And it's the sort of channel that you can get lost in. Within a year, you've gone from 0 to 10,000 subscribers and growing day by day. What are your plans for the future? You got any other ideas, any sort of other avenues you want to explore? I know you've gone out and done Glencoe and places like that as well. Are you going to stay in Scotland, or are you perhaps going to go somewhere else? So is there other places you want to look at?
Oh, good question. Right now, all I can think about is Scotland. Scotland has so many stories. Probably a lot like Wales. We've got the haunting stories. There's so much folklore to the place as well. One of the things I'm working on is a guidebook. It's the North Coast 500 guidebook, and rather than the kind of cafes and scenic places to stop, it's the ghosts and the folklore tales and the cryptids and things like that. And there's so many stories that we could cover on, or I can cover on that I could probably just keep the channel going for a good few years with just Scotland, even just Edinburgh. The Royal Mail, I think I've mapped out something like 36 different ghost stories or hauntings on the Royal Mail itself. Some of these stories, there's not much information about them, so it would be a very short video, but I could put together lots and lots and lots of different videos and stories from these. But the main thing for me is a lot of modern stories get lost, but we don't hear a lot about some of the things that are happening just now, and that's a lot because of how people are portrayed in the press. But I think things like the Uncanny podcast and TV show and the community that we're part of, that's been built up around that, is a really welcoming and accepting community. And I've had a few people contact me with some of their stories. John Tintal and I and a few other people are trying to write a book, and the chapter that I'm writing for the book is based in a street in Edinburgh, in the Marchmont area. It's all incidents, or it's all hauntings that have occurred from the 60s to modern day. So there are stories out there. Just need to find out how, or what would make people comfortable in coming forward with them, because I think some of these things are good stories to tell. And some of the feedback that I've had is it kind of helps people who've been in similar circumstances. So the more light we shine on these things, the more it can help. And just from a storytelling perspective, it just makes it such an interesting city to live in. So right now, stick to Edinburgh mainly, branch out to Scotland every now and again, and then see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I think you undersell as well. You were saying that some of the ghost stories are a bit light and there's not much to them, but that's one of the things I really love about Eerie Edinburgh. As someone who researches a lot of ghost stories myself and looks for stories, a lot of tales are, I was walking down the street and I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and that's it. But all your stories are so involved. The characters are so real. The horrific happenings that sometimes occur in them are so vivid that's what makes these stories pop. And that's what I love about Eerie Edinburgh. It's just that They're not just a sighting of a white lady. There's just not the sighting of a dark figure in a doorway. There is a reason for that ghost to be there. There is a story behind that ghost, and that makes things so, so powerful. Every guest I have at the fire pit at the heart of the forest always brings with them a story that they would like me to tell. Yours is quite a special one. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about it before I tell it?
Yeah, and thank you for reading this. I'm really excited to hear this. Genuinely, you're the best storyteller I've heard. So this is my favourite story being told by you. It's a real honour for that. So thank you. I mentioned when I was younger that I used to live near Morton Hall Cemetery, and it genuinely terrified me living there. My bedroom looked out in the direction of the cemetery, and I was convinced that something was going to come out. When I'm closing my curtains, I'm going to see a couple of red eyes coming towards me from the cemetery. And a big part of the reason for that is a story called The Croglin Grange Vampire. Croglin Grange is nowhere near Edinburgh, it's down near Carlisle. But that story basically terrified me so much that it genuinely, up until I was probably about 10 or 11, every night that I went to bed, I thought about that happening to me. And that was the reason why I was, I joke about it now, but I was dead serious that I was going to construct a metal neck brace because I was so convinced I was going to have somebody tapping on my window and a vampire's going to come and bite my neck. It just really, really imprinted on my psyche. I still think about it to this day, not quite to the extent that I used to. And it doesn't scare me as much as it did, but it's such a fantastic story. And it's another one that doesn't really, it's kind of been lost a wee bit over the years. Doesn't get talked around about a lot. You know, you've got Dracula and Nosferatu, things like that. They take the headlines, but this is such a good story. It needs somebody of your caliber to tell it, I think.
Oh, you're too kind. You're too kind. Before we get into the story, Wayne, can you just tell our listeners who have been kind enough to join us here at the Fire Pit where they can find Eerie Edinburgh and what they can expect to find there? I know you've talked about it, but perhaps just give us a little recap of the sort of stuff that you do.
Yeah, sure. So the website is called eerieedinburgh.com. It's just a lot of the YouTube videos. You can link to the YouTube videos from there. There are a few additional blog posts around some of the stories that I haven't quite covered. If you want to listen to the podcast, you can find the last couple of episodes that are regularly updated there. You can find the podcast on all major podcast providers apart from Apple. I cannot get onto Apple at all. And the main thing is the YouTube channel, which is just Eerie Edinburgh. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter, Threads, and all the other socials as well. So if you have a story, whether it's Edinburgh based or not, I'm always up for listening to them.
That's absolutely fantastic. Now, before you go, just sit back and relax as I tell your tales for those who joined us here tonight. Thank you for joining me, Wayne. Diolch yn fawr o galon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Owen.
The Vampire of Croglin Grange, as told by Augustus Hare, and read by Owen Staton. "Fisher," said the captain. "It may sound a very plebeian name, but this family is of a very ancient lineage, and for many hundreds of years they had possessed a very curious old place in Cumberland, which bears the weird name of Croglin Grange. The great characteristic of the house is that never at any period of its very long existence had it been more than 1 story high, but it has a terrace from which a large ground sweeps away towards the church in the hollow, and a fine and distant view. When in lapse of years the Fishers outgrew Croglin Grange in family and fortune, they were wise enough not to destroy the long-standing characteristic of the place by adding another story to the house, but they went away to the south to reside at Thorncombe, near Guildford, and then they rented Croglin Grange. They were extremely fortunate in their tenants, 2 brothers and a sister. They had heard their praises from all quarters. To their poorer neighbours they were all that is most kind and beneficent, and their neighbours of a higher class spoke to them as a most welcome addition to their little society of the neighbourhood. On their part, the tenants were greatly delighted with the new residence. The arrangement of the house, which would have been a trial to many, was not so to them. In every respect, Croglin Grange was exactly suited to them. The winter was happily spent by the new inmates of Croglin Grange, who shared in all the little social pleasures of the district and made themselves very popular. In the following summer there was one day that was dreadfully, annihilatingly hot. The brothers lay under the trees with their books, for it was too hot for any active occupation. The sister sat on the veranda and worked, or tried to work, for in the intense sultriness of that summer day, work was next to impossible. They dined early, and after dinner they still sat out on the veranda, enjoying the cool air that came with the evening, and they watched the sun set and the moon rise over the belt of trees that separated the ground from the churchyard, seeing it mount the heavens till the whole lawn was bathed in silver light, across which the long shadows from the shrubbery fell as if embossed, so vivid and distinct were they. When they separated for the night, all retiring to their rooms on the ground floor, for, as I said, there was no upstairs in this house, the sister felt that the heat was still so great that she could not sleep, and having fastened her window, she did not close the shutters. In that very quiet place it was not necessary, and propped against the pillows she still watched the wonderful and the marvellous beauty of that summer night. Gradually she became aware of two lights that flickered in and out of the belt of trees that separated the lawn from the churchyard, and as her gaze became fixed upon them, she saw them emerge, fixed in the dark substance, a definite, ghastly something, which seemed every moment to become nearer, increasing in size and substance as it approached. Every now and then it was lost for a moment in the long shadows that stretched across the lawn from the trees, and then it emerged, larger than ever, and still coming on. As she watched it, the most uncontrollable horror seized her. She longed to get away, but the door was close to the window, and the door was locked on the inside, and while she was unlocking it, she must be for an instant nearer to it. She longed to scream, but her voice seemed paralyzed, her tongue glued to the roof of her mouth. Suddenly, and she could not explain why afterwards, the terrible object seemed to turn to one side, seemed to be going around the house, not to be coming to her at all, and immediately she jumped out of bed and rushed to the door, but as she was unlocking it she heard a scratch upon the window. She felt a sort of mental comfort in the knowledge that the window was securely fastened on the inside. Suddenly, the scratching sound ceased, and a kind of pecking sound took its place. Then, in her agony, she became aware that the creature was unpicking the lead. The noise continued, and a diamond pane of glass fell through into the room. Then a long, bony finger of the creature came in and turned the handle of the window, and the window opened, and the creature came in. And it came across the room, and her terror was so great that she could not scream, and it came up to the bed, and it twisted its long, bony fingers into her hair, and it dragged her head over the side of the bed, and and it bit her violently in the throat. As it bit her, her voice was released, and she screamed with all her might and main. Her brothers rushed out of their rooms, but the door was locked on the inside. A moment was lost while they got a poker and broke it open, but the creature had already escaped through the window, and the sister, bleeding violently from a wound in the throat, was lying unconscious over the side of the bed. One brother pursued the creature, which fled before him through the moonlight with gigantic strides, and eventually seemed to disappear over the wall into the churchyard. Then he rejoined his brother by the sister's bedside. She was dreadfully hurt, and her wound was a very definite one. But she was of a strong disposition, not even given to romance or superstition. And when she came to herself, she said, "What has happened is the most extraordinary thing, and I am very much hurt. It seems inexplicable, but of course there is an explanation, and we must wait for it. It will turn out that a lunatic has escaped from some asylum and found his way here." The wound healed, and she appeared to get well, but the doctor who was sent for her would not believe that she could bear so terrible a shock so easily, and insisted that she must change, mental and physical. So her brother took her to Switzerland. Being a sensible girl, when she went abroad she threw herself at once into the interests of the country she was in. She dried plants, she made sketches, she went up onto the mountains, and as the autumn came, she was the person who urged that they should return to Croglin Grange. "We have taken it," she said, "for 7 years, and we have only been there 1, and we shall always find it difficult to let a house which is only 1 story high. So we had better return there. Lunatics do not escape every day." As she urged it, her brothers wished nothing better, and the family returned to Cumberland. From there being no upstairs in the house, it was impossible to make any great change in their arrangements. The sister occupied the same room, but it is unnecessary to say she always closed the shutters, which, however, as in many old houses, always left one top pane of the window uncovered. The brothers moved and occupied a room together exactly opposite that of their sister, and they always kept loaded pistols in their room. The winter passed most peacefully and happily, and in the following March the sister was suddenly awakened by the sound she remembered only too well. A scratch, scratch, scratch upon the window, and looking up she saw, climbing up to the topmost pane of the window, the same hideous brown shriveled face with glaring eyes looking in at her. This time she screamed as loud as she could. Her brothers rushed out of their room with pistols and out of the front door. The creature was already scudding across the lawn. One of the brothers fired and hit it in the leg, but still with the other leg it continued to make way, scrambled over the wall into the churchyard, and seemed to disappear into a vault that belonged to a family long extinct. The next day the brothers summoned all the tenants of Croglin Grange, and in their presence the vault was opened. A horrible scene revealed itself. The vault was full of coffins, and they had been broken open, and their contents, horribly mangled and distorted, were scattered over the floor. One coffin alone remained intact. Of that the lid had been lifted, but still lay loose upon the coffin. They raised it, and there, brown and withered, shriveled, mummified, but quite entire, was the same hideous figure that had looked in at the windows of Croglin Grange, with the marks of a recent pistol shot in the leg, and they did the only thing that can lay a vampire.